Who's pulling the trigger on this? I am?
Yeah. You have to bring the meeting to order, and then the clerk will.
Bring the meeting to order. This is Gil Cedillo, Chair, Housing, September 16, 2015. Ready for item one.
Item 1 is a HCID report relative to the issuance of tax-exempt multifamily condo revenue bonds in the amount of $13.6 million to help finance the development of the Lester apartments.
Okay. HCID, can we hear from you on this? Good to see you.
He's not here. Housing Department, Manuel Bernal, Director of Housing.
He's finance officer for this project.
Okay. So tell us what we got here.
We have a bond issuance, $30 million for lease to apartments, 133 units. It's a refinance. Bond issuance is actually the approval has already been received from CIDLAC. Mm-hmm. Today they got an extension, so we're looking at closing sometime in November. Okay. The project is affordable, and we'd like to continue it that way, and it'll be closing before December, and we fully support this project.
You got an extension. This matter was brought to you last March. Is that why you got the extension? Because
the developer got the extension, right? So they got an extension from CIDLAC to continue their bond allocation, and that they got today to be able to close by December.
Okay.
This is our first time out here.
All right.
No, that was it. We just fully support the project, and we just got the approval today from CIDLAC to extend the closing until December of this year.
Okay. Anybody questions? Numbers? Motion?
I'd make the motion to approve the committee recommendation.
Do I need public comment first? Let's get public comment before we take action.
How much time?
Is that correct?
How much time do you want? 1 or 2 minutes?
1 minute. I have Wayne. Anybody else?
Yes, it's good you got the continuance. The Fed is going to be raising interest rates, and also you want to program into this 13.6 whether or not the impending lawsuit of DWP not transferring any more money to you and what the fiscal impact is going to be for this $13.6 million loan. Because I think the interest rates are going to go way up for the city in the future to borrow. So if you have anything that you need to finance, now is the time to do it. Go to your neighborhood bank, beg for the money now, and close those interest rates now. Do not have floating interest rates, especially in the next 90 days, because we're headed for higher rates, and everybody's going to be paying more interest, and this could be a jeopardy to this project. So get the money funded, guaranteed, and locked in now, or forever hold your peace.
Thank you. We have a motion. Second. Second. Roll call. So, any objection? So be the order.
Mr. Chair, that takes us to item number 2, which is a HCID report relative to contracts for the rent escrow account program and utility maintenance program outreach services.
Okay. We are going to continue this matter. But I do want to take public comment. I have Wayne.
We're going to continue. What is item 2?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, we got Inquilinos Unidos. Yes, that's actually that's Hebrew actually for the United Renters. It's a good Jewish organization. They've been around since the days of B'nai B'rith. I mean, you go down to Inquilinos Unidos, and the Inner City Law Center Coalition for Economic Survival and Strategic Actions for a Just Economy. Oh, yes, they want a 9-month term with 2 options to extend up to 2 additional years, measly $150,000. Oh, that's not enough money. You should make it $300,000. And I'm sure, in the Jewish holidays right now, please give the Hebrew Institution of Inquilinos Unidos that money now.
Okay, this item's going to be continued.
Mr. Chair, that takes us to item number 3. Mr. Chair, would you like to hear items 3, 4, and 5 together?
Yes, that makes sense.
Item 3 is a HCID report relative to passing through the costs of seismic retrofits from property owners to tenants, subject to the rent stabilization ordinance. Item 4 is a Department of Building and Safety report relative to the number of licensed contractors eligible to do the necessary construction work for the soft story retrofit program. And item 5 is a CAO report relative to the PACE program.
Okay, let's bring up Building and Safety, HCID, and the CAO to make presentations on these matters. Let's start with Building and Safety. Yes.
Good afternoon.
We have new members on the committee, so why don't you give us a general overview why we're here and what we're doing here.
Okay. So good afternoon. My name is Frank Bush. I'm the Executive Officer for the Department of Building and Safety. And a quick overview is we've been working with the Mayor's Office regarding the seismic risk in the city to buildings within the city. We work with Dr. Lucy Jones, who is the advisor to the Mayor, and to look at the status of the seismic risk at buildings throughout the city. The history, we've looked at multi-story buildings, and one of the problems that we've had in earthquakes have been with apartment wood-framed soft-story buildings. So this ordinance that we have been working on here is related to buildings that have been identified as having been in the soft-story condition. The program, we were wondering how many buildings there were, so what we did is we researched the permit data that we had within the city, and we actually did a survey on all of those buildings to see if they would qualify to be inside this retrofit program, so we can get rid of the soft story concern, so when they start shaking that they would help them to stay together. So we've identified that there are approximately 13,500 buildings that would fall under the category. We've been working on drafting the ordinance for it. We have identified apartment buildings and condos for the most part in these. We've come up with a program that would be implemented in here, and at the last hearing, there were some concerns that there might not be enough contractors to do the work for these 13,500 buildings in there. We think that there are plenty for that. The Department of Building Safety issues 144,000 permits every year to do the work throughout the city, and the work gets plenty. What we did was we requested and paid for a report from the California State Contractors License Board asking for the number of B contractors, general contractors that would qualify to do this type of work. And they gave us a fee. We submitted a report to you. They gave us a report that said there's 102,284 general contractors. So when they sent us the report, we broke it down a little bit more to see neighboring counties within LA to find out how many there were. So the breakdown is in the report. I'm hoping that you have a copy of it there. There's 52,482 general contractors that would be qualified to do the work on this retrofit that would be required in there. And there are also a number of subcontractors that those contractors would use to perform the work that is in there. So we think that there are plenty in there to do the work.
So it's 52,000 for how many units how many buildings did we determine?
13,500, just under 500, 13,500.
So it's like 4.5, 5 per building.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we broke it down in the counties because there's a lot of the constructions going on throughout the city of LA are done by the contractors. Are mainly their main offices are outside the city of LA, and they're local, counties local, right next to us in here. So,
Good. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? Members? Ms. Fuentes?
Okay,
Yes.
question. So are we going to have presentations from HCID, or is that the conclusion of this presentation?
HCID and CIO.
Yeah, okay. All right, then I'll wait until the presentations are done.
Yep.
Good afternoon, Councilman. I'm Anna Ortega, Director of Rent Stabilization with the Housing Department. Our role in this and our task was to look at the possibilities for recovery of costs that landlords are going to expend on the cost of the seismic retrofit and how those costs should be shared between landlords and tenants. When we last met with you in June, you directed us to convene meetings with landlord-tenant groups, or actually that was earlier this year. And we've done that throughout the spring. We had a total of 4 meetings with a variety of groups that represent both landlords and tenants. And we identified in those discussions various issues that they have concerns about, such as financing and the ability of landlords to obtain financing, as well as the rent burden and the ability of tenants to absorb the pass-through. Also concerns from landlords about the possibility of loss of their renters if they have to pass through any costs of the retrofit. There were concerns about the availability of qualified contractors, which might drive upward pressure on the cost and even could result in price gouging. There was concerns about the mapping and the distribution of the universe of 12,000 or so buildings that need to be retrofit. There was agreement from both landlords and tenants that we need to advocate for sources of financing, such as tax credits and any other sources that might alleviate the total expense, and a request that the city could support with the easing of planning fees and other fees involved. And there was questioning about whether the proposed 5-year timeline is a sufficient timeline. When we last met with the committee in June, we briefly discussed what the cost range would be under this existing rent stabilization programs. Under the existing programs, the most appropriate current program is called the rehabilitation program that allows 100% cost recovery for any work that's mandated and has a $75 maximum monthly rent increase. We found that under that program and under the cost scenarios that we have now, the approximate average cost would be about $57 per month. But there's actually 3 programs under which landlords can apply, and the cost range would be between $24 to $75 per month, depending on which program is used. At that time, you asked us to go back and look at the variables and what we could come up with that might be different to possibly alleviate the impact on tenants. So depends on what program you use, whether you allow interest, what the cap is for the work, what the amortization period could be. That's very important. Whether there's a phase-in, the percent that's allowed to be passed through to the tenants, and whether it's a temporary surcharge or a permanent rent increase. So we were requested to report back on alternatives, and that is what is covered in our report today. I will have to say, well, first of all, acknowledge the important work that the Landlord-Tenant Working Group did. I think they have made a good faith effort. They attended many meetings, and we had some frank discussions. I can't say that there was agreement on any one recommendation, but I think there was an acknowledgement that these costs will need to be shared and that this is important work for the benefit of the city. So in our report, we discussed that one way that we could split the costs based on one suggestion at the task force is to use an existing program that splits these costs 50-50 between landlords and tenants. And that is the existing capital improvement program. We could implement that. You could adopt the law today, and we could go with that tomorrow. But there was also a concern with even the $55 cap that exists for that program. So one suggestion was that be split from the current $75 for the rehab program, split in half. So a possibility would be to, within the existing capital improvement program, adopt a provision that these costs could be recovered under that, but that you adopt a lower limit for seismic work of $38. And you would still typically, under the scenarios that we ran, be able to recover the eligible costs. At the committee's request, we looked at other alternatives. So to look at that, we assumed average costs based on voluntary retrofits that have been done, that we got data from Building and Safety for, as well as some applications in our own system. Voluntary retrofits over the last couple of years, and we came up with an average per unit cost of $4,300. So if we were to follow an alternative that's discussed in the report, which again splits the cost 50-50, implements the $38 cap, and in addition to that, doubles the amortization period from 60 months to 120 months, then we came up with potential monthly pass-throughs ranging between $14 to $21. And with the typical, or with the average per unit retrofit cost of $4,300, the monthly pass-through would work out to about $18 a month. Within that recommendation, there would be still some policy decisions for the council to make. One of them in our report is whether that should be part of the base rent or not. And if it's not, then it would be a temporary pass-through. And another question is whether there should be an interest cost allowed to be added to the monthly pass-through amount. If the council wants to do that, we discuss that the pass-through of interest costs is tricky because it depends on the landlord's credit rating and the source of funds used and the program that's used. So rather than use any actual costs, we would recommend using similar imputed interest rate that's already in our primary renovation program. So that uses a rate based on the 10-year security note plus 1%. And under today's rate, that would work out to about 3.22%. If you assume a monthly pass-through of if you assume a per unit cost of $4,300, that would add about $3 to the monthly pass-through. Lastly, all of this will represent a new program with a huge impact on staffing if we adopt this, and if we get applications for pass-throughs for the projected 1,500 or so a year that might come through. We currently only handle 400 rent adjustment applications a year, so this would mean basically a 500% increase. And though we're looking at ways to streamline how we process the applications and make it easier for landlords to understand, this will represent a significant increase in a need for staff resources. So I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Go ahead. Before we go to questions.
Good afternoon. Natalie Brill at the CAO's office. I'm the Chief of Debt Management in the CAO's office. The council passed a motion instructing us to look at financing options for the city's seismic retrofit program. In June, CAO's office looked at different options on how to finance this program, and the one that we recommended was an open market PACE program, where basically we would contract out with joint power authorities and use their already existing PACE programs to finance these improvements. In June, you approved the city moving forward with the California CSCDA with two agencies, Alliance and NRG, and renewable funding, which is called California First, and also to join CEDA as another JPA and use the Fig Tree. So those three are currently in place to be able to use for this program. And right now, basically, the program is voluntary because there is no mandatory ordinance. In addition to that, the county has put into effect their own program called HERO, and that also is available for city residents to use, city landlords to use for their seismic retrofit. What this report in front of you does is it adds two additional PACE providers. It adds E3 and it adds Y Green and authorizes us to join two additional JPAs, the California Municipal Finance Authority, and actually we already are a part of the California Municipal Financing Authority. We're not one of the California Municipal Housing one. So we just need to join the PACE program. So that brings up to 6 PACE providers that city landowners will actually have to be able to join and use to finance. The way that the PACE process would work would be that the property owners would submit an application to one of the 6 PACE administrators. And the reason we want a lot of PACE administrators is to foster a little bit of market competition. The more people, the more agencies available to landlords, we're hoping will lower the interest costs. That's what I believe that the whole point of the open market is. The projects will be reviewed and approved based on seismic retrofit. The providers already have pre-approved contractors. So these are contracts that actually already been pre-approved by these 6 PACE providers to do seismic work specifically. In most cases, the property owner would pay the contractor and then receive a loan from the PACE provider. The lien is placed on the property, so there's no credit check, which is, I think, appealing to a lot of property owners, that it's part of your tax bill. So when you get your tax bill, it shows up as an assessment on your tax bill. The property owner repays the loan as an assessment added to their property tax bill. So, like I said, there's no general fund impact here on the financing side. In addition to that, this is our first report that's in front of you. The committee has also, and council also requested us to do a second report, which we're working on, which is a little bit more complicated, which talks about researching incentives and other financing options. We actually have been in contact with San Francisco that has adopted a mandatory program, similar to, I believe, is what the councils would like to see. And they actually reached out to potential lenders and hosted a forum to discuss the program and encourage low-interest loans to do the seismic retrofit. We believe this won't be possible until we actually have a mandatory program. That's what San Francisco did. They actually waited for the mandatory program. They had this forum. They encouraged the local banks as well as the big banks to come in and talk about what they could do for property owners if these property owners did not want to participate in the PACE program. So it would give just another option to property owners. We also are researching the possibility of city tax incentives. This is taking us a little bit longer because it's also dependent on the work that building and safety and housing are doing. And there's a new Assembly Bill, 428, that would actually provide property tax credits for seismic retrofit. We know that the bill was approved under bipartisan support and that it is on the governor's desk, and he has till October 11th to either sign or veto the bill. Our intelligence in Sacramento tells us that he probably will sign the bill. Obviously, there's no guarantee, but that's what we've been hearing. So that's where we are on the second report, and we hopefully the next 2 to 3 weeks, we hope to release that report for you so you have some additional options. But in the meantime, our recommendation is to adopt the resolutions that you have in front of you to move forward with these 2 additional PACE providers. In addition, as additional PACE providers are identified, we will bring them to your attention and adopt resolutions. Unfortunately, we just can't automatically approve them. There's indemnity language that we're concerned about. There's also issues to make sure that the city is protected as well as the property owners are protected. So we do an extensive review of all the contracts to make sure these PACE providers are doing what they say they're going to be doing. We're not just relying on the JPA. We're doing our own research to make sure that occurs. That's unfortunately has delayed our ability to come to you and say, okay, here are more PACE providers. But as soon as we found that about these 2, we did our research and we came back to you now for approval of those. So I'm available for any questions.
Someone here from the mayor's office? Can you get another chair and stay up?
Hello, I'm Ashley Atkinson with the Mayor's Office of Economic Development. Thank you for inviting us up. This is Thalia Polykarnas with the Mayor's Office of Public Safety. We are just here to thank our departments for all the work that they've done in gathering this information, meeting with stakeholders, and bringing these reports and motions to this point. Also like to thank the committee for your consideration and all the thought that you're putting into this. We know it's a complicated issue, and we're here to support moving these items forward. We know that there's a lot of discussion still to take place, that there are stakeholders who we also thank for all their attention and discussion of this topic. We know they still have some concerns. We're happy to have subsequent conversations on some of those points and to support the committee and the council as you continue to consider these programs. We did also want to say that we have made a priority of AB 428, the tax credit bill. It's been a central focus of our legislative efforts in recent months and in recent days, now that it's made its way to the governor's desk. I believe the CAO sort of summarized everything, so I'll not go into those details, but we do understand that the chances are good, but that demonstrating our local commitment to moving this forward would go a long way towards encouraging the governor to sign that bill. He does have until October 11th. So we're continuing to advocate with the governor's office, and we'll do whatever we can to support that moving forward as well. And we think that will go a long way towards helping us put together a complete package and a program that works for the city and keeps us all safe. And I will turn it over to Thalia if you have any more comments.
No, I think that's it. And members, we do thank you for your continued support and work on these issues. The mayor feels very strongly that creating a more resilient Los Angeles and ensuring that our affordable housing stock is protected in the event of a large earthquake is one of our key priorities. So we're just happy to do whatever it takes to help move this along.
Okay. Members, questions?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you'd be willing to do this, but I actually think that the conversation would be well suited if we took the cards, the speaker cards, and then, because I've got questions, but I'd like to sort of do it in the context of what folks have got to say.
Anyone else?
Okay, that's your prerogative, sir. Whatever you want to do.
Let's see what they have to say. Okay. So we're going to hear from the public, and then we'll have our conversation. Everybody stick around because we'll have questions. Anyone else have questions of the panel? Huh?
I want to.
Okay, sure. All right, well, let's start with Harold Greenberg, Jim Clark, and John Walton Setterfit. Okay. Mr. Greenberg, how are you?
Hi, thank you.
Good.
Gentlemen, Harold Greenberg, AGLA. Look at this in a positive note, not just as to the effects, but look at it as an economic stimulus, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to create jobs. But when we look at it, as the Building and Safety Department indicated, 130-something thousand general contractors, they're not the ones that are going to be doing the job. What we have to find out is the foundation contractors, the C8. How many are engineering contractors, an A? That's where it is, and that's where the prices may go up, and that's where the competition's going to be. But let's look at it in another factor, and I frankly have here enough copies for this group and also the city attorney's office. Not only are the tenants going to suffer and the landlords are going to suffer if there's an earthquake, the insurance companies and the banks. If we take a look at the largest slumlords in L.A., it's the banks and the Deutsche Bank and Bank of America. This is a plan where we can get help for everybody and we could share the load. It's a positive rather than a negative and rather than antagonistic. I'd like to give it to the clerk to pass around. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jim Clark with the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. I was actually pleased to hear the comments from the mayor's staff, as we think we're kind of moving a little too quickly with regard to creating a pass-through. Only because there were some concessions that we were looking for in the beginning. Both sides agreed that there needed to be a package put together, a funding stew, we were calling it, to lower the price of these projects so that if there is a particular pass-through, that it would be as low as possible. So we want to hear from the mayor's office with regard to concessions such as waiving business license taxes for owners who are doing these projects, or reducing the cost of permit fees through building and safety and planning, things like that. Also, we would like to hear from some financial institutions. Partnering with financial institutions in this could be a big break for us if we can get some of these folks on board with regard to the projects. And finally, yes, we need to wait to see if the governor is going to sign AB 428, which would be very, very instrumental in keeping the prices down of these projects, the 30% tax credit for retrofit projects. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you need me to.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Centerfit?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. John Walton Centerfit. I'm a tenant, a member of the Rodney Drive Tenants Association and several other organizations that are represented in the room as tenant advocates. But I'm also a specialist epidemiologist and ethicist with the LA County Department of Public Health, specializes in the importance of housing and the impact of housing and housing burden on the health of individuals, families, and communities. I'm most strongly concerned about minimizing the pass-through to our most burdened renters. 70 to 80% of the poorest, 70 to 80% of the people who are the poorest of our renters, less than 30% of area median income, already spend more than half of their income on rent. That means they're actively having less money and are cutting costs on food, on education, on health care. So I think we have to minimize particularly the impact on these low-income people by making sure that it's temporary, maximum amortization, a good step in the right direction according to the proposals that have been made, but I would say we got to figure out a way to cut the tenant portion to zero for anybody who's paying less than $1,000 a month.
Thank you. Elizabeth Blaney, Beverly Kenworthy, and James Porter.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Blaney with Unión de Vecinos, and I'm also a resident in Boyle Heights, and we don't support the current plan, mainly for a couple of reasons. There still hasn't been anything done, and we've been asking for several years now around reforming rent control completely. It seems to be inspection and SCEP fees continue to go up. This pass-through is being recommended. There's talk of water proposal pass-through going through, but there's nothing on the tenant side that is giving any type of protection that we've been asking for to make sure that there's still not this continuation to overburden. And so this shouldn't go forward until that is looked at. And we also understand that there will be a greater economic value with the retrofitting happening to the landlords, and so it shouldn't be 50-50. It needs to represent a percentage that more adequately reflects the balance of who's going to be gaining the economic value in this. Even HCID's own numbers say turnover every four years is what they're seeing with some of the tenants, and when the landlords will be able to then recoup a greater fee with the vacancy decontrol. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Beverly Kenworthy. I'm with the California Apartment Association. We've been actively engaged on this endeavor for the past 18 months. I've met with Lucy Jones, the mayor's office, within the RSO working group. And right now, we are not supporting the proposed pass-through, not because we don't like it, we just don't know how it's going to work. The ability of this program to be successful is going to rely on whether a landlord or an owner can qualify for a loan. And how do they qualify for a loan? They're going to have to show how they're going to pay it off. And this $38 right now might be a great number, but it might not be a great number. We need to find out what that threshold is, and we're hoping that the CAO would be meeting with the lenders sooner rather than later, so we can ask these critical questions. And, I mean, there's a multitude of issues. My time is running out. But for us, that's the biggest question on how is this number going to work for the lenders to get this work done. It's the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir. Good to see you.
My name is James Ford. I'm a member of LA CAN. How y'all doing today? I'd like to bring to your attention that I do not own this building, own the property. The landlord owns the property. Why should I pay for their property? Okay, it's coming out of my pocket. If you own something, you're responsible for it. So it should be between the landlord and you finding ways, because you got many ways to find other ways to help them, not include the tenant in this, because it's not our property, okay? They're responsible for it. I've been coming here 8 years about tenant rights. Y'all know me. And not once have I seen you, how can I put it, favoring the tenants. It's always the landlord, every time. So it's something I have to question that. Have some concern about us, okay? Landlords don't have the right to everything, okay? Just remember that.
Thelmy Perez, Evelyn Ramos, and Francesca De La Rosa.
Good afternoon, Housing
1 second,
Committee
Thelmy.
One second, sure.
Hold on. Hold the time.
Good afternoon, Housing Committee members. My name is Thelmy Perez. I'm the coordinator of the Los Angeles Human Right to Housing Collective, also here with Renters Day Los Angeles Alliance. We're very concerned with this proposal for a 50-50 pass-through. One, because it assumes that there's equity between landlords and tenants, which there is not. There are many reports that have come out since 2009, including the Economic Roundtable report that was done then on the rent stabilization ordinance. They clearly showed that tenants are really suffering in the city, and that was a forecaster for what we're seeing right now, which is a severe housing crisis where 60% of our tenants are rent burdened. One of the things that we asked for, and we had participated in the tenant-landlord working group with HSID, one of the things that we had asked for was a list of where these buildings are. And absent that list, these residents that will be most impacted can't be here to talk about what that will look like for them. I think it's very important to look at what the rent burden how the rent burden will be increased on these tenants, and to look at the area median incomes where the most affected neighborhoods will be. We have some recommendations, and I'll leave these here for you. I also have shared them with all of your offices. So we hope that you will seriously consider going back to the drawing board, giving a little more time, and making sure that we know how this will increase rent burden and not continue pushing housing prices up in the city of Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, council members. My name is Evelyn Ramos, and I'm from District 14. I'm considered low income, and my rent just went up $100 last month. So I'm here to oppose this new proposal that you guys have for the landlords to share this, what do you call it, retrofitting? These costs, we cannot afford it. We just simply cannot afford it. This is not our property, and I don't think we should have to carry the burden of having to pay for this. First of all, we just can't afford it, and it's just, I simply just don't agree with this, and I just don't think it's fair. I think that this is the obligation of the owners and not the tenants. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Francesca De La Rosa with Works and the Renters Day Coalition. Today's proposed cap is much better than what was initially recommended, but let's be clear, this is another rent increase. We're talking about another rent increase for renters who are already living in the most unaffordable rental market in the country. This proposed rent increase is on top of the annual 3% allowed under the RSO, and for these reasons, we do not support this proposal as of today. We are further disappointed that today's meeting is not focused instead on prioritizing a strong quality repairs ordinance or expanding Ellis protections or finalizing and implementing a rent registry. It is these policy priorities that renters and those most at risk for losing their housing want action on. We cannot continue to make it harder to live in this city. Let's instead focus on policies that will offer the greatest tenant protections, offer real rent relief, and protect our city's housing supply. Thank you.
Elsa Chagoya, Steve Diaz, and Yolanda Gonzalez. Wabash.
Go ahead.
No, it's bad. Please.
Hi, my name is Elsa Chagoya, and I'm the Executive Director of Inquilinos Unidos United Tenants. We support making LA's rental housing stock safer and therefore support the goal of retrofitting all buildings. We are concerned, however, with this proposal. The cost of ensuring rental buildings are safe is the responsibility of landlords. The pass-through costs must be higher to landlords because they receive a monetary gain of increased value on their property, while tenants only benefit from their current housing needs. Retrofitting must be done without increased rent to tenants. The options in the report do not take into account the allowable annual RSO rent increases. So the pass-through cost for the retrofit, coupled with the annual allowable RSO rent increases, place a greater rent burden on tenants in an already dire economic situation. As we all know, Los Angeles is the most expensive rental market in the country, and tenants, especially low-income tenants in LA, cannot afford to pay more. Other options must be explored, such as imposing a freeze on rent increases under RSO or lowering the allowable amount and financing by lenders.
Please.
Yolanda Gonzalez, I am a property owner in Venice and in Boyle Heights. I'd like to know if I live in the United States or I live in a socialist country, because this is absolutely asinine. My job didn't make me money. It's the investment that I did with my husband that put me through. We are 65 years old. We retired. We supposedly retired comfortably. Right now, in order to get a loan in Boyle Heights, because we were declared blighted, it took 4 banks for us to go through because we needed to do some renovations. But they didn't lend us because we were in Boyle Heights. And it took us to go to a bank that lends in very depressed areas to get a loan, and we finally did get it. Today, because I don't have passive income, together with my husband, and my husband's retired, we couldn't let it get a loan. They want us to refinance, but to lower the rate at the loan that we got. This is what you have to consider. I wouldn't want my tenants to take the burden. I hold the deed on my property. It is mine. You need to go back to the table. That's why you have insurance companies. If we want to hold an insurance policy to retrofit, that's the insurance company's responsibility.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Steve Diaz, and I am with LA CAN, also the Renters Day Coalition. We also do not support the current proposal being considered today either. When the RSO was created, it was to ensure that balance between landlords and tenants existed, and our proposed $38 pass-through does not accomplish that. A $38 pass-through, in addition to a 3 to 5% yearly pass-through, makes rents even more affordable in the city. No pass-through must be allowed. If a pass-through does happen, it must be temporary and not part of the base rent. Tenants must not be charged any interest that is accompanied for any loan that landlords might face. Lastly, the longest amortization period must happen. It is imperative that this council take action if a pass-through does happen to lower the rent burden and create balance with tenants, such as creating a temporary freeze on yearly rent increases as well. Thank you.
Cool. I've got Mark Wagner, Carlos Aguilar, and Sylvie Shane.
Hi, I'm Mark Wagner, and I'm with a company called ENS Ring Management. We have several apartment buildings that are going to be affected by this. I believe my main focus is the rent control ordinance, the pass-through, and how does the property pay for this. Notwithstanding the current burden of a property already having a principal debt service, how do you get a second on that, given the current environment with the pass-throughs? How do you get a loan when you can't get the pass-through until after the work is completed? Also, the pass-through process as it is quite burdensome. We have taken 3 months to a year to get an approved pass-through. How does that work with getting a loan on the property when you have to pay for this retrofit? And then if a tenant vacates, the pass-through goes away. And I wish you would consider these facts, in regards to this ordinance. And the main focus is how do we pay for it given the existing rent control pass-throughs. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carlos Aguilar. I'm the Director of Organizing for the Coalition for Economic Survival, and on behalf of CES, I would like to speak on the proposed pass-through of seismic reinforcement. To start, we want to note that the existing system is unjust and creates an unfair burden on more than 60% of our already rent-burdened tenants. The allocation of costs between property owners and tenants is uneven and may result in displacements, which we cannot have. We also want to note that the cost of seismic retrofits of rental units is a business expense, and the cost of recovery is available in many forms, such as vacancy decontrol, tax write-offs, and the value of the property then goes up. So landlords have ways to come out ahead. Tenants get a safer building, but they bear the entire cost. Given the political realities and the administrative challenges, the proposal is a fairer compromise than what is currently allowed. In the end, the use of the existing capital improvement is a step in the right direction, and in a modified form, if allowed a 50-50 split, an overall cost with a 38 cap is better than what is currently in existence. We also support the amortization to be extended over 10 years, and we do not support allowing direct interest expenses. Finally, we believe the charges should be temporary surcharges and not part of a permanent rent. Thank you.
Sylvie Shane. I applaud the city for taking proactive measures to guard our housing stock and our people against the disastrous impact that an earthquake would have. As they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. However, as a rent-burdened tenant in the city of Los Angeles, I am wondering why current proposals for this retrofit have the financial burden being placed on tenants and their landlords. We, a small minority, are being asked to pay for the ounce that will undoubtedly save the city, the state, and the federal government a very big pound in the event of a massive earthquake. Not to mention the potential billion-dollar savings to the insurance companies that hold a stake in this discussion. It seems that in the haste to finalize this retrofit plan, many stones in the forms of grants and subsidies are still left unturned. I am aware that Bill AB 428 that offers landlords a 30% tax break on retrofits just passed the state Senate and could soon become law. If tenants are currently being asked to foot 50% of the cost of the retrofit, how then will this tax break be passed on to them? And how do you plan to ensure that all future incentives and cost savings, such as lowered insurance premiums, will then have its pro rata share passed on to tenants? I understand the city's current rehabilitation program allows for a more significant pass-through for this type of work, but this begs the question of whether the existence of this program even makes sense in LA's current socioeconomic conditions. Thank you.
Mike Lemure, Richard Osterstrom, and Steve Luftman. Mark.
Good afternoon, Chairman Cedillo and honorable committee members. My name is Mike Lemire. I'm Vice President of Y Green Energy Fund, a California-based PACE financing provider. I'm here to speak in favor today of the CAO's recommendation to add Y Green and E3 as additional options to the city's pool of PACE Finance Administration firms. At your committee meeting 2 2 months ago, my colleague Crystal Crawford spoke in favor of your recommendation to add, and subsequently was approved by the full council, the California First and Fig Tree programs. We did so because we honestly believe in choice and competition in the marketplace. We've seen the benefits of that in all the markets we operate across the state in the form of lower costs, lower interest rates, and better service for your constituents. We understand that Los Angeles has ambitious goals in seismic and water and energy conservation. Y-Green's the #1 provider of multifamily and commercial PACE financing, and as such have thousands of contractors registered, and we recently hired 5 new full-time employees in the city of L.A. I'm looking forward to expanding with, should you pass on this recommendation from the CIO's office. Thank you very much, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Council members, I'm Rick Otterstrom, past president of AGLA, and I just want to point out that retrofits do not increase the value of a property. They may save a property in an earthquake, but today, if you had yesterday made a retrofit and you put your property on the market, you wouldn't get any more money because it was retrofitted. And anybody that's in the business would know that. It's a lot like replacing your roof every 15 years, every 12 years. That doesn't make your property the day after you put a new roof on worth any more than it was the day before you put the new roof on. So what you're hearing about retrofits making property more valuable just does not stand up. Also, I'm in the know. Also, you've heard about this from others, but the mom and pops who take the money that they get off of the profit that they get off of their small apartment buildings, they spend that on themselves as their retirement, and banks won't look favorably at lending when you have a very small pass-through. Thank you.
Council members, I humbly ask the following. My name is Stephen Leftman, and I humbly ask the following. Please revisit the question of whether it is fair and makes sense to hold tenants to such a large portion of this retrofit at a time when we are so severely burdened with rising rents. Please ask that the mayor further identify and request state and federal assistance in the mitigation of risk for which these agencies would also be financially liable in order to alleviate the burden to property owners. That whatever costs are passed on to tenants be authorized for as long a period as possible in the form of a temporary surcharge, not included in the base rent calculations, which current vacancy decontrol laws and the HCID current statistics of an average of 5 years turnover rate for RSO units. Landlords can effectively re-rent at market rate every 5 years, thereby freely recouping cost. That interest not be part of the calculation for the pass-through cost, and that instead the city work with lenders to provide landlords with publicly subsidized and interest-free loan options. That cumulative yearly cap be placed on the total pass-throughs and rent increases under which all existing programs, rehabilitation, capital improvements, primary renovation, and any other improvements in today's...
I need you to wrap up your thought.
Okay, this is the final thing. In today's real estate market, properties are being bought and sold at a high rate, and there is a significant incentive for new property owners with deeper pockets to renovate properties in order to command higher rents. The ability to recoup this investment...
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. We have Wayne and Jonathan Ayan.
See, I see you snuck condos in there. Nice job, little sneaky guys. Property owners to tenants. So now you're going to hit the condo association buildings with this scheme. in addition to rental units under rent stabilization. So all these poor condominium owners now are going to have their monthly assessments increased. They're fee simple owners, so now you're attacking them too. This is nothing but modern day slavery. That's all it is. The people that can't afford it are paying for it. The poor tenants, they get no benefit out of this. The man just told you the retrofits don't add value or benefit to the unit. So the tenants are paying for something that isn't worth shit to them. And that's what you're doing. This is a scheme. It's a Soviet-era style government in this city. It's imperialism, and it needs to stop. All of you resign.
Jonathan, please.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Ayon. I'm here on behalf of Tide City C and Renters Day Coalition. I just want to go on record that we do not support the 50-50 split for earthquake retrofits, as it increases the rent burden on renters. Burden is the key word here. You guys heard it over and over again. LA is majority rent and mostly low income, and these low income renters increase every day. Landlords would most definitely try to take advantage of this as they take advantage of the Ellis Act. And there's other priorities, such as eliminating the 3% increase, eliminating the moving forward quality repairs, rent registration as a preventative measure of illegal rent increase, and insurance and banks can take the burden. Low-income renters cannot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, questions? Do you need the staff back up? Mr. Fuentes?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to have the staff come back up, and I've got a couple of questions, Mr. Chair, if it's okay. But before I begin my questions, I just wanted to thank you for hearing the public comment cards first so that we can have, I think, a very informed conversation. And thank you to my colleagues for being here at 1 o'clock. It means that at 3 o'clock I can start my committee with plenty of time, so I greatly appreciate it. I'm beginning to sense that there's a real dislike by both sides on this, which may be, colleagues, a place where we're getting closer to a solution. Because unfortunately, I hate to admit it, it seems like when everybody hates things equally, it's when we're getting closer to a final product. So let me say that I absolutely understand the perspectives. On one extreme, you've got a belief by tenants that that what it is that they pay for should be certified, sealed, and delivered to the best possible capacity, and why would they have to contribute more? And I can understand that perspective. On the other extreme, you've got folks who are owners who understand that mandates are being asked of them, and presumably insurance companies are there to recover any losses, which is why they've done their bit in this. So it's to say that both perspectives, I think, are accurate depending on whose shoes you stand in. But I do know this, that in 1994, when we had the Northridge earthquake, there were some fatalities, and it was a terrible, terrible situation, and invariably we're going to be in that same place. But what folks, I think, what's lost on a lot of people is that during that earthquake, aside from the obvious tragedies, there were so many buildings, and Mr. Bush could probably help us understand how many, that were red tagged. There were things that we could not see that made it so that people can no longer inhabit those buildings. And there were numerous in the multifamily dwelling space. At the time, I was a field deputy for then Councilman Padilla, Council President Padilla. In my area, a charge was the North Hills area, which is a very dense, very multifamily, 20,000 plus people in a very contained area. And I hazard to guess that about 20% of those multifamily buildings were red tagged, which created a bunch of other situations. We had afterwards, for many, many years, high levels of crime, prostitution, drug use, because those red tagged buildings became a real blight to the community. So we didn't have a seismic event that killed hundreds or thousands of people, thank God. But we had a legacy in an area that, but for the renovations and rehabilitation, created a terrible situation in North Hills, one in which we now are barely celebrating the removal of those same things, the crime, the drugs, the prostitution. So the lasting legacy of doing nothing is really, really bad. It's one that is going to really inhibit all of our abilities to be able to better the lives for those communities that desperately need multifamily dwellings that desperately need quality rental facilities. So it's a very, very complex situation that's before us. And so I only half joke when I say that we're close to a solution, because there's about the equal amount of disdain on both sides. But the position that I just shared with you all about where we sit on what it is that needs to be done, deserves to be done, is one that we can't avoid much longer. So I am heartened by the fact that there is a real opportunity, and the mayor's office reported this, that there's a chance that Mr. Nazarian's bill will get passed. I hope so, because in my experience serving with this governor, with some of my colleagues in the legislature, is that he's not a big fan of tax credits. And so if he's willing to sign this, we're in a much, much better position in terms of the policy. So I think that's a long way to say that we probably have to wait and see what it is that this governor does on the morning of the 12th, when we all wake up and realize that he has signed or has not signed this. But between now and then, I think there's a couple of things that might help the conversation, and hopefully will make it so that we put forward the best possible policy, because waiting, doing nothing, isn't an option for me. And the fact that we are here, Mr. Chair, thank you, in that it's no longer a 100% pass-through world, that we're contemplating something less than that, is good news. Now, it's not the end product and it's not the final news, it's good news. And so the questions that I've got that come to mind are a couple fold here, and they're not any order, they're just sort of thoughts which came from the public testimony. But Ms. Brill, you are going to be the most important piece of all of this, because you're speaking to the financing of all of this. And so I just wanted to talk out loud to see if it is that I understand correctly where it is that we presumably could go. So for me, the ability to finance all of this is going to be a large part of our success here. And it really will likely determine how much is passed through to the tenant. And I say that because I don't know that there's any way other than to pass through something. And that's a conclusion that I've got today. Maybe we can find something innovative between the tax credit and something else, but as it stands, I think there's going to be some sort of pass-through. And I want to thank the speakers that mentioned, please make it temporary, please don't make it part of the base rents. I think those are very constructive suggestions. But presumably, these PACE programs will help carry a lot of this burden, in that the work can be done, and chances are that they'll attach a lien to the property, and so we may or may not have to have some of the out-of-pocket costs initially to get caught up with the revenue stream that would come through a pass-through or that sort of thing. Am I understanding that sort of scheme properly, in terms of how it is that a PACE-like provider would help us put together a program?
Yeah, my understanding is that the property owner would make an application, right, to the PACE provider. The PACE provider would look over what the improvements need to be made, they get a cost estimate, and a loan would be given. I'm not exactly sure if each PACE provider waits for them to issue the loan, or if there is out-of-pocket. I think it depends on the PACE provider, and that's why we gave 6 different options. And that's why we allowed all 6 different ones to come in. So you, as a property owner, would look at each of those 6 providers and make a determination of how you'd want to handle the loan, correct? Either you would accept the loan and then begin paying it back on your property tax, right? Or there would be out-of-pocket expenses that would be reimbursed by the and then you would be reimbursed by the loan later. Each one is different. So I think each property owner would have that decision. That's one of the reasons we also wanted to bring in the banks. Some property owners may decide it's their better interest to take out a second mortgage. For some reason, they may decide it's a lower interest rate. They may decide they have the cash flow to do it. So that's one of the reasons we do want to meet with the banks, to see what they have to offer. So I think that from our perspective, it's about providing options to the property owner. And each program, and when these are posted on whatever website is created for people to go on and look at, they'll be able to see what the terms and conditions are of each of the PACE programs. They'll be linked to that provider, so they'll be able to look at that and make that determination.
The enacting statute, though, does it dictate how it is that PACE providers are to finance projects, or is it solely the design of the provider? Do we have the ability to say to PACE providers, here's what your program will look like as it relates to seismic retrofits, so that we could help those landowners who, as one of the testimony folks testifying indicated, they don't have any active revenue aside from the actual asset that we're trying to fix, so they're hard-pressed likely to get the financing in a traditional sense. Can we constrain, or rather, not constrain, can we help design the lending mechanisms for the PACE program?
No, we cannot. And that's one of the reasons when we recommended going down this path, we looked at what other agencies had done, like, for example, San Francisco. They had gone out to bid, and they provided, and at the end of the day, they ended up doing what we're doing, right? Because it was so difficult, the procurement process was just so difficult and so time-consuming that for them to structure the program was difficult. These these PACE providers have come to the JPAs and put forth their programs, right? And each of the programs is a little bit different. We are trying to step back from getting involved with that to allow this type of competition to occur, to allow the lowest possible interest rate to occur. And by letting the providers do that, we believe it will be in the better interest of the property owners. We're trying to reduce the cost of the property owners. So we actually met with several PACE providers just to get, because we had no idea what they were, right? Such new programs for the city. And we understood that some of these PACE providers are backed by banks, right? Some of them are backed by investors. So that's going to determine what rate they're going to charge, right? One of the PACE providers had an engineering firm already on staff. So when a homeowner brought their idea of what they needed to the provider, the engineering staff went through it and connected and gave them a list of contractors. Said, these are the contractors that can do your work. So that was done up front for them. So a lot of what the interest rate is going to do for the property owner is the administrative work for them, getting them a loan, getting them the contractor, getting them the engineering approval based on the program that Building and Safety is saying. So I think it's a huge advantage to property owners.
Sure. Well, to that end, we should move expeditiously on adding more PACE providers, and I think there's an item, Mr. Chair, that does that, so I would be happy to make the motion there. The part that I think is sort of, well, not sort of, it's incredibly important and missing, to me at least, as we're talking about this, is actually talking to the banking community, separate and aside from the PACE conversation. You know, there are existing practices and patterns when it comes to this type of thing. I think of construction loans, for example, that initially start off very low in terms of the serviceable debt until the conclusion of a project, and then it converts into a mortgage or a lien, a second lien. To me, it seems like that might be a way for us to have the revenues of whatever is anticipated to pass through get caught up with the actual cost of the rehabilitation. So where are we with our banking community, and what power do we have to compel them to help us in this conversation? I know the answer, but I'm just wondering, are there any actors out there who have said to us, we want to figure out how to help? Presumably, this is a good revenue stream for them. I mean, it's a mandate, it's guaranteed business, and it's something that there's going to be a whole lot of in Los Angeles.
It's all, again, when we did our research, San Francisco was the one that actually went out and reached out to the banking community. They had these series of workshops, they called them, but they waited for the mandatory ordinance. And the reason was because the mandatory ordinance is going to tell the banks exactly what needs to be done. And until that's done, the program right now is basically voluntary. We're not exactly sure what needs to be done. There's no ordinance telling us or mandating what needs to be done. So what we recommend, and that's why we're working on the second report, is once that ordinance is adopted, that we go to the banking community. We've already started to reach out to several associations. We already know several banks and have mentioned to them that, we'd be interested in what they have to say about these commercial loans. So we've started this informal outreach, but I think it would be in the city's best interest to wait until you all decide what needs to be done before we actually hold these workshops. That's the direction, I think, that makes the most sense for the city. So that's basically our recommendation, to wait for those workshops to be set up. Because by the time Building and Safety puts everything online and we'll have an idea of exactly what this will cost and what the banks, and then go to the banks and say, okay, this is what we'll need. This is, incentives for the banks. We work with a lot of banks in the city. We're not only, on our side, on the debt side, but also, they invest in our community. They participate in housing programs. They participate, with the Treasurer's Office and being our bank. So leverage in the sense of these banks is, we do a lot of business with you.
Yeah.
We're inviting you to participate. What can you do for us? We do a lot of business for you. And that's the way we tend to approach the banks. We have a long-standing relationship through housing, through our office, the Treasurer's Office. Let's see what you can provide. And then we would put that also on the website. Give us a contact information that somebody can come to you and say, I'm looking for a loan. What can you give to me? And that's what San Francisco did. And so some property owners in San Francisco, the majority of them are using the PACE program. But, some of them may decide to use these commercial banks. And at least they'll know who to contact. Right? I mean, we can't really dictate the terms to the banks.
Right.
But they'll have, they can dictate, Mrs. Smith at, Bank X, Y, and Z for this type of loan. That's what our idea is.
So I've got a couple other thoughts, but I'll just limit it to one or two more questions, and then I'll let my colleagues speak. So the San Francisco program, this is very helpful, housing department, for you to have sort of put together existing, new, and what San Francisco does. By all measures here, our program, from a tenant perspective, is going to be a little bit better than San Francisco's, in that we're not passing the 100%, or proposed program, it's not finalized, is a little bit better in that we're not doing the 100% pass-through. It's not a set percentage of the rent, and I think that's good. The thing that I was sort of struck by as well, though, from a tenant perspective, is how do we make sure that we don't stack any additional sort of pass-through. So if you have, for example, this mandate that goes into effect, and you have a situation where the property's already in the middle of or about to be slated to go into rehabilitation, now you're really layering a bunch of different costs for no better reason other than timing on the tenant. Has there been any sort of thoughts about how it is that you construct sort of the schedule by which we would do this part of the mandate? I understand that we couldn't, for example, tell a property owner, don't improve your building because it's their prerogative, but we could have the ability to say, if you're improving your building, you don't have to do this mandate at the same time, so that we don't have this additional impact on the tenant, especially if we consider not including it in the base rent and making it a fixed sort of time. So that's a very long question, number one. And then number two, what, along the lines of the schedule to the tenant, what have we given any thought to creating a scale? For example, one of the testimony members of the public who testified suggested that that we don't do a pass-through for those very low income situations. I think the speaker said something to the effect of people who are paying less than $1,000 a month. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just wondering, is there definitions there where it would make sense where we didn't do a pass-through? Has there been any investigation to that end?
On the first question about the
schedule
and the cap, if the council chooses to modify the existing capital improvement program, it has a maximum total cap for all capital improvement pass-throughs at one time of $55. So if they ever apply for other work, it's all encompassed in that $55.
For RSO properties?
Yes.
So market rate properties, they could do whatever they like?
Yes. In any case, it's really not the issue for non-RSO properties, because they could increase it whenever they want to, by however much they want to.
Sure, but I guess we have the ability, though, to temper how the mandate on the seismic part. We could say if to a property owner, you don't have to do seismic today. I'm speaking to the market rate folks, because even market rate is really fragile. I mean, in my district, the renters who are in the market rate area are struggling just as much as anybody else. In Council District 7. So I'm just wondering how it is that, I understand RSO, we have the ability to sort of cap how much of an impact the tenant has, but in the market side of things, would we be able to feather the throttle here so we don't have such a impact on the tenant?
On non-RSO properties, there's no restrictions on rent increases or anything. So that gets into, could we regulate rents on non-RSO properties, or could we regulate pass-throughs?
Yeah.
And I don't believe that Costa-Hawkins allows us to do that.
See, the reason I'm asking the unintended consequence that I sort of foresee, if you're speaking to folks in Culver City or Venice, for example, where, well, let's use Venice, where they're allegedly being pushed out so that entire dwelling can convert to a crowd-sharing, crowd-hosting thing. I wouldn't want us to be the excuse with a mandate to really stack additional costs on somebody to move them out and then have a whole building convert. That's why I ask, is there a way for us to consider being flexible on the mandate on the market side of things, not an excuse, but give folks the ability to not have to layer so much onto the tenant. I don't know if it can be done or not, but I see an unintended consequence here potentially.
I think some of the answers to that go to regulating the conversion, which is
a separate conversation.
More related to an upcoming
Got
report.
It. Okay, very good.
On the question about flexibility depending on income, it has been suggested. There's a lot of issues with that. We could certainly look at that again. In San Francisco, they first adopted their seismic program, and then later on they adopted a hardship program. But I will say that income levels are very different in San Francisco. We've been in contact with them. Although they have a hardship exemption, they've had a tiny handful of people apply, and they have a very different system than we have. They have judges, lawyers who hear the applications for exemption based on hardship, and they do that actually for all of their pass-throughs. But that means they have a whole staff to hear testimony on income level, on assets, all of that. LA doesn't have anything like that, so we would have to create that and find the resources to operate it. Also, it's a little... What happens if you get a hardship exemption in San Francisco, and what would happen here is there's no way to make that up. So if a tenant can't pay the pass-through, maybe the landlord can absorb one tenant. But if all the tenants can't pay the pass-through, there's no source to make up the difference. So that's why I think they reconsider it annually, because they check to see if this tenant status is the same, so that they could impose it if the tenant's financial circumstances change. So that's a pretty involved program that we would be doing, something that is not the way we do it in LA.
Last question, Mr. Chair, at least for this round. Mr. Bush, remind us again how many soft-story buildings in the city of Los Angeles thereabouts?
We've identified approximately 13,500.
And so that's the universe of buildings that are vulnerable today in terms of multifamily?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Actually, what are the total sort of units out there?
I don't know what...
So 13,500 soft story.
Yeah, these are the buildings that we identified that were built before 1980.
Okay, and how many total buildings in the city of Los Angeles that are multifamily?
I'm not positive of that number.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
Do we know as a percentage?
Sure. Of most of that would be the RSO universe, and there's about 120,000 buildings.
120,000, 13,500 of which are, so almost 10%. More than 10%, 13%, yeah. 12 and a half.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the conversation. Appreciate the work, the hard work that all sides have given done on this. I appreciate the comments from both sides. I think the idea of increasing the PACE contractors is a good deal. It makes a lot of sense. And I'd second your motion that we approve those that have been proposed. Talk a little bit about the, and I do appreciate the fact that we have a little more reasonable sharing. I think 50-50 is a good place to start, although I know some would like to see it a little different than that. What was the, you mentioned that we're going to be approaching banks about their level of involvement or their products that they may be offering that are going to complement this, and you said we're going to wait until after, or have we started having any of those conversations now?
We believe, based on our research, it'd be better to do it after the mandatory ordinance for seismic retrofit is passed. This way we'll have a very structured program, know exactly what needs to be done, have a better idea on cost. That's our recommendation that will be sent forward in the second report we're working on. But in our course of doing business, we mentioned this, and it's been in the newspaper. San Francisco has a program, so nobody will be surprised by the fact that we'll want to gather all the banks and invite them to come. And they're going to come. They'll come to our workshops. They'll hear what we have to say. We'll ask for contact information, which will provide homeowners, property owners, with information if they do want to take out a loan. Based on all this research, we see a real advantage to the PACE program. The fact that it is a lien on the property, the lien continues even if you sell the property, right? So any improvements that will be done, there's a guarantee they'll be paid back. There's no credit check, which, as one of the public said, it's a big deal to go out and get a loan these days. Most property owners can't do that, regardless of income level, regardless of where you are in the city. So the PACE program provides, we believe, a good alternative. And one of the things we also found was, and we mentioned this in one of our reports, is that it's not just about seismic retrofit. It's about sustainability too. There's a big push on sustainability, making buildings more green, I guess is a good way of putting it. Most of these PACE programs offer that too. So one of the things that we've been asked to look at is, can a property owner do everything together? Well, sure they can, because these PACE providers provide the gamut. Right, provide sustainability, water savings, seismic, energy. So there's a real advantage to, if they want, to a property owner looking at the PACE program, we believe, versus a bank. I'm not saying that a bank is not a good option.
Right.
I'm just saying it just gives another option. Somebody who owns 5 or 6 of these buildings and is a big corporation, it may be in their best interest to go for a commercial loan, as the councilman was saying, because of the way construction loans work.
And as you said, some of the PACE contractors have relationships with banks for certain programs.
Right. So I think that once we have a better idea of exactly, the ordinance has been adopted and what the program will really look like, we can go to the banks and say, okay, this is the program, what do you have to offer?
Yeah. Well, I too think we should have perhaps some kind of carve-out for the very low income, and again, I don't know where that is, but I think it is worth having some more conversation around that. Part of the discussion, though, that I heard from at least one, maybe two members from the public, they suggested that as part of this discussion, the city had talked about some waivers, or maybe it was the mayor's office, some waivers or reduction in fees. Where are we on that as a part of this discussion?
The CAO will be coming back on looking at several options that were mentioned. Other waivers, I think, will be addressed by, building safety or planning. I don't think the CAO can really address those. I think they have to look to building and safety and some of the other departments to address if they believe they can do that or not.
Well, it needs to be a part of our discussion, I think, Chairman, at some point. Yeah. Did you want to comment, finish on that?
The fees that we have come up with for this program would be approximately $665 to cover the plan check permit fee and the inspection fees. And those are fees that are based to recover the cost of providing the staff to do the work. So if the fees weren't charged, then we'd have to come up with some other resources from the city to pay for the staff for that work.
And again, we anticipate that's an upfront fee that's paid at the time the application is made, or could that also be spread out, or what's the idea?
That would be at the time that the permit is issued. that fee would be,
So under PACE, that would be covered, right? So when you go for your loan, that's part of your...
that would be covered, yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Usad, I feel a question coming.
Just a quick question on the cap. We have a $38 cap as proposed, and I'm not sure if Mr. Fuentes was asking this, but why not do a percentage as opposed to a absolute number?
It can be done either way. A cap tends to be probably lower.
The absolute amount, not a percentage.
For instance, in the existing primary renovation program, we have a 10% cap, but that is for your average rent, according to the data that we have, that's about $176 a month. So that would be much higher. Usually, I mean, it can be created in any way. You could use a percentage, but the programs that we have generally used dollar caps.
What do we see?
And it's a small percentage. So 38 is like 2%.
Okay. That's like 2%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I could foresee a situation where the cap is always charged. Do you think that may happen?
It's not up to the landlord to decide what the amount is. It depends on the cost of the work and how many units benefit and the amortization that we pick. So
But 38 is about 2%.
of what our statistics say are the average RSO rent.
Okay, all right. And on the PACE adding folks, competition is good there, as mentioned. I think that would be good to foster and support that program. But that's all for now. Thanks.
I mean, one of the things that we've been encouraging is that people know of other PACE providers to tell us, and we'll come through with more resolutions. You know, we found 4 at the beginning, and now we're adding 2 more. So we'll keep adding them as we know of them. But at the beginning, we only found, 2 or 3, 4. The 4th one actually was the county's program, which we already were a part of. So we actually only found 3, and then all of a sudden everybody was in the council agenda, and 2 more people came. Okay, there's 2 more. Okay, so we'll work on those. So we want more on the PACE.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for folks who gave testimony, and both expert and from the community. I think the part about expanding the folks doing the work makes a lot of sense, and it seems like that's something that we'll probably consider separately because it seems to be a little bit less thorny than the financing part of it. I had a sort of outside the box question about the financing of this work. When an owner does an improvement on their property, they have a property right? So you get to say, I'm selling you a building with a new roof. It's worth more than a building with a roof that has leaks in it, theoretically, right? So the retention of value, or the value that you get based on what the money you spend, is very clear. What's unclear to me is how the renter benefits. So I'm financing this improvement that, unless an earthquake happens while I'm living there, I get zero benefit from. So I'm just curious to see if there are any programs that have been tested that accrue some benefit that's portable for the renter.
There's nothing like that under the Los Angeles rent stabilization provision, or really any of the rent stabilized jurisdictions that we know about and work with. So I don't know how it would be portable.
Any other questions?
No. I'd love to hear about that should you come upon something.
The portability lies in the status, I think, of the tenant, right? Yes. Because the laws stay constant and protect them perpetually. So if your status remains as a tenant, as you move place to place, you're guaranteed the security of your building, the tenancy.
Right, but for example, Mr. Chair, because it sounds like you might know about this. So in New Orleans, when there was Katrina, right, a lot of building owners used Katrina as an opportunity to move tenants out, right? So in this situation, if we have an earthquake and I've paid for the building to be retrofitted, right? Could the city perhaps give me a protection as a tenant to say earthquake damage cannot be used as a reason to take away my rights as a tenant if I'm paying for the retrofit?
Well, it could, I mean, we could think about a right to return, which we have in other areas of the RSO, assuming that there's a safe building left standing to return to. We could think about that.
The rights of the tenants don't dissipate by necessarily the earthquake, but so those will stay constant, right? Yeah. And so the duties and responsibilities of the landlord stay constant. The whole genius of the scheme, though, is that this is a threat to displacement. This is the greatest threat to displacement, right? And that by averting the tragedies that would befall us from an earthquake, and there was one yesterday reported, that then we don't have that scenario. I mean, that's if on the report was that this could be the biggest displacement of working men and women in this city, in this region, if this took place. And so the whole point is we make the investment so that that doesn't happen. It is the ounce of prevention. Let me play off your riff on, did you call it a mutual
disdain?
Mutual disdain. So some people don't know this, but I was actually a union negotiator before I took this job. And I've learned that this mutual discord, this acrimony, can be indicative of a compromise or of an agreement, although I haven't seen a lot of movement on the sides here. So I will say, and I think it's important, one of the things we did in labor negotiations is we always started with a review of where we started. And that was good because we walked in here several months ago, the three of us, and we walked in and everybody was very upset. The heat in this room was incredible, and everybody was pissed off because they had heard there was going to be 100% pass-through to the tenants. And all I could say is, and as I said then, that's not going to be the case. And so the Times reporter was here and said the city has indicated they're not going to do that. And so it's important to say that so that people can have a sense of where we're walking towards and what we've accomplished at this point with respect to this conversation, and then they can choose to feel however they want to feel about it. But the fact of the matter is that this conversation has moved from the first time we walked in here and there was a belief that there was going to be 100% pass-through of all the costs to the tenants. And clearly we are not there. In fact, we are walking away from that direction. Members, I'm prepared for us to move the, where is this thing? To move the request for the city attorney with assistance of building and safety to draft the language to mandate the retrofit so that we can indicate to Sacramento that we are moving forward and committed to protecting tenants and property owners, as outlined in the Resiliency by Design report. I do, though, want us to hold the conversation about how the costs and the questions of the AB, the Nazarian bill, AB 428, all the financing aspects that Mr. Fuentes brought up and that are brought up by the AB 208, that part, I think we still have a lot more work to do. We have to gather more information. I hope we're letting the banks know that we're committed to this by moving the ordinance. But clearly, as I said at the very first meeting, we want to create a menu of economic resources for landlords and building owners so that then they can choose what works best for them. And our desire is to first protect. Our number one obligation is to public safety, and that means we must go forward with this to protect all the tenants and the building owners. But we want to do so in a way that's most equitable and most fair. And we want to create a menu of resources. It's a very rich region and rich state And I think, Mr. Fuentes, there's still more resources that we can gather. Maybe the Earthquake Authority, maybe some others, where we can, with our policy experience that sits here, figure out a way in which we really bring down to a featherweight the burden both on the landlords and the tenants. And so that's my objective, that we hold that. So I want to move the request to go forward with the language and to outline the ordinance, and then continue the other aspect. We'll approve the CAO report and then continue the other component part so that we can continue the discussion.
Mr. Chairman, does that include the PACE, the recommendations to
Yeah, PACE-
additional PACE?
Yeah, PACE is in the conversation that we're going to hold.
This is a recommendation that we approve to additional providers. Is that part of our discussion?
Okay, so let's start from the top again.
Okay.
So item 3. So item 3 is a report relative to passing through the cost of seismic retrofits for property owners to tenants of rental units subject to the rent stabilization ordinance. So that we're going to continue.
Number 3 is continue.
Number 3 is continue. Okay. Number 4 is, item 4 is request city attorney with the assistance of building and safety to draft language to mandate retrofits of soft story and concrete buildings within the city of Los Angeles as outlined in the Resiliency by Design report. Okay? That work? And then number 5, I have approved the CAO report. The main point I want to capture here is that we are holding off the conversation about the financing components, right?
Right, it's the financing components as well as, I think the resiliency report talked about incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to come back in 2 or 3 weeks with.
And continue to, this conversation is only beginning with respect to how so we know what has to be done. We have to retrofit all the buildings, and we have to protect the tenants and the building owners. We agree on that. That's going to cost, and the question before us, since we started this conversation, is how much and who pays?
Right.
And that conversation has to continue.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
How much, who pays, and who gets what for paying? So what does the renter get? Do they get a right to return? Like, I think that ought to be spelled out so that, again, if it seems as if renters are going to pay something, so the question becomes, what do they get for what they're paying?
Not a problem. Excellent.
Housing will.
So the questions remain, right? Who pays, how much, and what do they get for the payment? Okay? And that conversation will continue. We have to look at for more resources, and for the city, we have to think about the question of Sacramento, more resources, Earthquake Authority, which is flush with resources, and other entities, and then look to see if we get any help from our friends from HUD and from the feds. And then there is, of course, the entirety of the private sector, and there's a mandate that we're going to move forward, and there's an incredible opportunity for people in the private sector to step forward and help us secure our community.
And Mr. Chair, if it's okay, in the report back, also sort of the conversation of the scale. I understand that at first blush, it would create a whole bureaucracy to determine who is exempt from it, but maybe there's some other thoughts when you all get back to see if there's a way to say that the very, very, very low folks don't some demonstration so they don't have to do the pass-through. Just a conversation there would be effective.
Yeah, that's still part of it, yes.
Yeah, that analysis, but we obviously don't want to create a whole other bureaucracy to do hardship exemptions. I mean, we do a number of hardship exemptions in land use issues, for example, or when we do ICOs or other things, but it's just a administrative quick review. We don't have to create a whole panel to review this, and it could be quick. It could just be certain people under this amount get exempt, an exemption process or a waiver, something that we could review that, analyze that, and see if that's a possibility.
You know, it just occurred to me that we have the Lifeline program, I think, in solid waste and wastewater. I'm not sure how that works, but I know that there's a percentage of people who are exempted from or pay
Right.
less.
Up here, we've all worked to advocate for poor people. There's an abundance of programs we've worked on, the free lunch program. And then we've figured out with computers that you can actually program, once you determine who the people are, you can actually program enrollment and cross-enroll like we did with Medi-Cal and free lunch programs so that people are deemed exempt and deemed into the program. So let us think about it a little bit with the accumulation of our experience, and then with your technical expertise, I think we can fashion something. That's the intention, right? Okay.
I'd make
Members?
a second to that motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Clear as mud, everybody? Yes.
Mr. Chair, is there any general comment
Yeah, there is.
for this meeting?
Okay, general public comment. No praise expected. We all ran voluntarily, and we love our work. So, general public comment, Sylvie, Shane, is this Leyland? Okay, Leilani's unavailable. Yolanda Gonzalez.
Mr. Chair, maybe you would want to remind the speakers that general public comment is limited to items that were not scheduled for today's agenda.
That is an excellent point. General public comment limited to items not on today's agenda. Sylvie Shane, Yolanda Gonzalez, Wayne, and Teresa Marcus.
Sylvie Shane. So I would like to respectfully ask the committee, this is separate from this seismic retrofit conversation, but about the pass-throughs that can be passed on to tenants under the rehabilitation program, the capital improvement program, and the primary renovation program. I'd like to ask the committee that separate, that you look at putting a cap on the ability for owners to utilize these three programs concurrently, which would effectively create 10% rent increases plus a potentially $38 pass-through for seismic, plus $55 under the capital improvement program, plus an additional $75 under the rehabilitation program, which, when you look at the cumulative total, could be upwards of a couple $100 per year increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzalez?
Yes, Yolanda Gonzalez. You know, it really amazes me that after all these years that I've been involved with the city council, part of the legislation of city council, neighborhood councils, I am just amazed what the city council is doing. But I'm going to tell you something. Here you're trying to push something that is really, the Constitution protects property rights. And if you can't fix what is going on in Boyle Heights in the 14th District with the Exide issue, where people need to be moved out of their homes because they are getting sick and dying, and you're trying to get ahead on this, this really puts the city council in embarrassment. And all you're doing is pushing us to separate this city and separate certain districts. There is a movement out there now. Cityhood for Venice and probably the 11th district. And
Wayne?
this is what's going to happen. Thank you.
Wayne?
Oh, okay. I thought you was going to spare it. Yes, good job again at your continued slavery and irredentism that goes on. Not one of you knows what irredentism. One of you went to college. So You did a good job today on destroying property rights. You did a good job today on imposing slavery. You did a good job on scamming the condo owners into this program. You did a good job on turning Dr. Lucy Jones's research into a banking boom. You did a good job on pissing off everybody that thought they could support you. And you did a good job at once again ramming something through that you can't pay for. Nobody can pay for this. The banks aren't going to lend money on something. Once you pass this ordinance, these buildings become defective. They're uninsurable because now they're in violation of building and safety regulations because of your actions. Shame, shame, shame.
Teresa Marcus.
Thank you very much. My name is Teresa Marcus. I live in Boyle Heights. I am a property owner and resident of Boyle Heights. I came here to ask you to please assign someone from the city of Los Angeles to the Excite issue. I'm not representing, but I am part of the advisory board. And if you think DTSC and AQMD, and now the three people that are being, an EPA, and now the three people that are being assigned to this issue are going to do something for us, they probably will, but it's going to take a long time. What I've asked LA to do, what other cities are doing around with the contamination of this lead and arsenic, is to push to have those houses clean, to come and represent us. I am asking for it, and Father Moreta's asking it, and a few of us, but I think we need the city of LA to come in and be part of the fight, be part of the push to have those houses clean. We have approximately about 5,000 houses that have been identified as being very dangerous places to live in. Thank you.
That wraps us up. We're going to a special agenda.
Mr. Chair, would you like to adjourn the regular and go into the special?
Sure, let's do that.
Mr. Chair, as you adjourn that meeting, I have to excuse myself, unfortunately, because of committee, but I'm going to look to trying to figure out how to change my schedule so that I don't miss this very important conversation on the Consolidated Block Grant Program. Thank you.
Planning of the city.
Mr. Chair, item 1 is the HCID report regarding CDBG timeliness and recommendations for reprogramming.
Good afternoon, council members. Ed Gibson from Housing Community Investment Department.
Yes.
Today is Julie O'Leary. Thank you for taking the time. We'd like to talk to you about the CDBG and the programming and timeliness. It's a topic we've mentioned before. Going back to last January, it's a measurement that's done every January 31st. We missed the timeliness test. We must be at 1.5 times the entitlement each year, and they tested on January 30th. This past January, we were at 1.31. We missed it by $1 million, which basically put the city on watch with HUD. Now, over the course of that last program year, we knew we were going to have challenges with that and made several adjustments along the way. Remember, we lost the CDBO category for doing services, so all that money started pushing into capital projects. And so staff did an outstanding job, and I mean across departments, across the way in the city, working together to get us as close as we could to making sure all the expenditures are timely. When we had this current program year for CDBG, the comments went out, we need to make sure all projects are shovel-ready, if you will, ready to go, that they could expend funds timely. With that said, we're coming back today, and we're looking at how expenditures are going, and it notated several challenges across the realm, whether it's information or staffing or challenging inside of departments, that we are not going to meet the timeliness goal. And this particular moment, when we do the forecast out, we're going to be a minimum of $14 million short. So we're coming back to say we need to do reprogramming, and the recommendation is to do $20 million in CDBG reprogramming, switch it to a category that can be expended immediately in the short term, before January 31st and provide that urgency that's definitely going to be needed to make sure we hit this goal, because to get there is going to be a challenge. But first, we need to identify those issues. Do you want to comment? Okay. And happy to answer any questions.
Members, Mr. Weezer.
How did this happen? We don't have alarms. We don't have things going off in our calendars and, tracking systems for our budgets. Why would we allow ourselves to get in this place?
Again, well, that's a great question. So if we go back historically and you take a look at the expenditures from comp plan year, if you will, 39 back to 36 to 37, the city has historically put money in projects that weren't necessarily shovel-ready per even the expenditure plan that the city has passed. And so with that said, that money would sit there until the project was ready to go. Now, at 1.5 times, that actually gives you quite a bit of leeway. When you start adding up all the years, so your 36 is sitting there, some 37 sitting there, your $38 are sitting there, 39, and you start looking at what's a problem, what's a challenge, and you come back. We had this same type of conversation last August about the concern about meeting timeliness, and it was even raised probably even prior to that, quite honestly. But it's the 1.5 times test that's been going on, and that alarm's been very close for years, prior to my arrival, quite honestly, the last couple of years. But it's a buildup over time of how we've been allocating the money on a citywide basis that these projects aren't ready to go. One of the larger challenges is that some projects come in and there's no understanding of the timeline of when they're going to get done. So you can't even project what type of project it is or where it's going to go. And so it provides a great challenge to expend money when no one has a plan in place yet. And so the shift has become more of those. We have been saved historically by the sheer fact that we were doing quite a bit of services. Almost 30% of CDBG was we were using it for services, the other two categories. And with that loss, that became the real challenge. So this last year that's passed, a great effort was done, a lot of things were made, and even with that, I think we pushed another, I want to say it was almost $18 million, but very close. More projects and capital went into CDBG and less in services because HUD told us to stop. Those challenges now are caught up to us. Now the current challenges are you have projects that aren't clear on where they're going to go or what they're funded for, and they're not ready to go. You have departments who have suffered various cuts along the way and may be limited in capacity to actually deliver these projects, and then others who just need additional funds to get going or perhaps even scope of work. And when you put all that together, here we sit. We don't come empty-handed. I mean, we can do a lot of nuances, a lot of work. We've talked about this topic before. We've talked about these numbers before. But at this moment in time, we started off the year with about $130 million on April 15th. We have spent down now to about $104 million. But even with that decrease, when you forecast out, you don't meet the timeliness test, and we spend any more. And so when we look at the department's pattern of spending, when we look at the services dollars and we do the projections on what people are supposed to be doing after their past practices, if they continue their past practices, we're still 14 million short. They're just not going to make it. They're not going to make it. And so we're pulling the cord down. It's not close at all. It's not at all. It's not at all. So part of the answer is we've also identified inside this transmittal potential places that can be spent. And that's really the challenge here. It can't be a new construction project. It can't be something coming off the ground because odds are it's not going to get its permits or everything else in time to have its money expended by the January 30th date. So with that said, we've looked at things from housing and various departments across when we asked the questions. And to date, I think we've probably found at least $26 million in potential projects where the money could be expended. But the challenge is we've only been identified through talking to the various departments and units of $6+ million where it can be reprogrammed.
Okay. Got it. Anything else? I don't want to. Look, right, and my recommendations, we adopt the recommendations with following amendments, but we're going to adopt them or continue?
Okay, so we're going to adopt these recommendations, and then we're going to continue, right? So direct the CLA with the assistance of HCID and the CAO to report on CDBG projects that have funds reprogrammed and identify projects that could receive the CDBG funds and expend the funds by January 30, 2016. We will continue the item in committee. We'll look at your recommendations and maybe we can augment and come back.
Speaker's card.
Speaker's cards.
Sure.
Is that good with everybody?
Yeah.
Yep. Speaker cards, Mr. Wayne, I don't see him. Not in. Does that take us out of
Yes.
special session? Are we prepared to adjourn? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved?
Second.
Second? So be the order.
Thank you, sir.
Hey,
Yeah, we'll do this, Chairman.
brother.